Hi guys, in this unit, as you're looking at cell structure and function, we're going to take it from that level, very small level of cells, to start looking at how cells and organisms are combined together to make tissues, and then tissues are combined together to make organs, and then organs are combined together to make systems. You don't need to memorize a lot of the human systems because we're going to look at a lot of those in more detail as we go throughout the year. So tomorrow you're going to have some handouts to do. For today, I want to talk in detail about plant anatomy because some of these things you do need to know in a little bit of detail. So let's start looking at how different types of plant cells make plant tissues, make plant organs, make plant systems. All right, so basic plant anatomy. You've got the first organ we're going to look at is the root. And the root has two parts to it, the root tip and the root hairs. So at the end of the root, you've got these things called root hairs. So here are root hairs right here. And what they do is that they provide extra surface area for the root. And that allows the root to absorb way more water. Okay? Roots do a lot of other things too. They help anchor the plant in the soil, they are absorbing minerals and water, and they're storing food. Please remember that plants do not get their food from the ground. They make their food through photosynthesis. They get the minerals and water they need to make their food from the ground, not their actual food. So roots are going to absorb things, and they're going to store things, and then they're going to anchor the plant. Okay? There's a picture of a fiber. There are different types of roots. So that's a type of a fibrous root. Okay, and it's going to be this thin mat of roots that's going to spread out very far. You're also going to have a tap root. Like this one, this tap root is going to go way down deep and do a lot of storage. Okay. And then you're also going to have these root hairs. So here's a really good picture of root hairs. And they really increase surface area and allow the plants to absorb way more water and way more minerals through that enormous amount of surface area. And there are some really dirty pictures throughout this whole lecture, so giggle on your own time, okay, people? All right, next thing we want to talk about is the shoot or the stem. That's the second organ in the plant is the stem. So roots are one, and then the shoot is the next one, okay? It's made up of a series of nodes and internodes. Nodes are where a side branch comes off, and then the internode is a space in between two branches. Buds are going to be where new things flower from. You're going to have terminal and apical buds. Terminals are the ones that go out to the sides. Apical are going to be the ones that go up, apex, top. Okay. And then you're going to get flowers and buds. So here's some different types of shoots that can exist. Okay, so you can see you can have these long ones that run around the ground. The bulb of an onion is actually the shoot of the onion, surprisingly enough. Dirty picture again, sorry. All right, and then the last organ of the plant is the leaves, okay? Leaves are made on the inside of mesophyll tissue, and then they also have veins, and we're going to talk about that. So your three organs of a plant are the root, the stem, and the leaves, and those are going to be organized into two systems, and that's the root system, which is usually all the stuff that's below the ground, and then the shoot system, which is usually all the stuff that's above the ground, okay? Plants are pretty easy. Three organs, two systems. Way easier than animals. All right, let's talk about leaves a little bit more specifically. You have different kinds of leaves. You can have a simple leaf that just has one blade, okay, sticking off from the side of the branch. You can have a compound leaf that's got many little leaflets sticking off from the branch, or you can have a doubly compound leaf that's got all these series of leaflets sticking off from the branch. And you figure out by where is it joined with the petiole to the branch. Okay, what is the function of leaves? Leaves are green, so they're the part that do photosynthesis. Okay, they're actually making the food, making the carbohydrates for the plant, and they're doing gas exchange. Remember that plants do basically the opposite type of gas exchange that we do. They take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. Okay, and plants have openings in their leaves that allow them to do that. The other thing that happens at the leaves is transpiration. And transpiration is really just a fancy term to describe the evaporation of water out of a leaf. As water evaporates out of the leaf, as the water gets warm, we call it transpiration. Okay, here's some different kinds of fun leaves. All right, here's a little bit on the internal structure of a leaf. Notice that there's a lot of open space in the leaf. Okay, there's a lot of open space, and that allows for a lot of gas to be inside the leaf, a lot of carbon dioxide to be brought in to be used for photosynthesis, and a lot of oxygen that can then be released as a product of photosynthesis. The gases come in and out of the leaves through these openings on the underside of the leaf called stomata. Okay, so that's where the gases come in and out, and also where water will evaporate out of. Okay? All this stuff, this is all the mesophyll. And then in the middle of the leaf, there's also the veins, and that's going to be the vascular tissue, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so here's your systems. Both the root system and the shoot system are going to depend enormously on one another. Same as in the human body, no organ system can survive on its own. It's not like you could just be a walking digestive system without a nervous system or a respiratory system. Everything is dependent on everything else. Same way with plants. The roots require sugar from the leaves so that they can grow and have energy and do the things they need to do. Okay, so sugars go both down to the roots and up to the other parts of the plant. And then the shoots, the top part of the plant, is going to rely on the roots to get water and minerals for it and to hold it in place, because the roots are also about stabilizing and anchoring the plant. Okay, so without the roots, the shoots couldn't survive, and vice versa. Water and minerals move up the plant. All right, there are three types of tissues in plants. So we talked about systems, organs. Now remember, organs are made up of different types of tissue. There are only three types of tissue in a plant, and they're called dermal, ground, and vascular. All right, dermal. Hopefully makes you think of derm or epidermis. So the dermal layer of the plant is the outer layer of the plant. Okay, it's like the skin of the plant. Okay, it's going to be a single layer of cells. It's going to cover and protect the plant. The ground tissue is most of the plant. It makes up kind of the middle areas of the plant. Most of the mesophyll, the parts that do photosynthesis, are all ground tissue. Vascular tissue are kind of like the circulatory system of the plant. They're moving water and minerals around through the plant, so it's transport. And there are two types of vascular tissue. They're called xylem and phloem. All right, now remember that tissues are made of cells, so we need to look at the different types of cells that exist within a plant. And here are the three favorites. These names are great. They're called parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Great names, huh? And Miss Foglia likes to make the joke, if only I'd had triplets, she could have named them parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Pretty funny. All right, parenchyma cells. This is what you call a typical plant cell. When you studied cells in intro biology and you looked at a plant cell versus an animal cell, when you were looking at that typical plant cell, you were looking at a parenchyma cell. Okay, all photosynthetic cells are going to look like this. Storage cells are going to look like this. Okay, collenchyma cells are going to have an unevenly thick wall on the outside. It's going to be thicker in some parts than in others, and they're going to be used purely for support of the plant. And then there's sclerenchyma cells that have a very, very, very thick woody secondary cell. These are going to be enormously rigid. They're never going to elongate or grow, and they're actually dead at functional maturity. It's kind of a crazy thing about plants. A lot of their cell types, well, two of their cell types are going to actually be dead when they're doing their job because they don't need to grow, and so there's no point in wasting energy on keeping those cells alive. They die, they stay rigid, they do their thing. Okay? All right, so here's a little bit more about parenchyma cells. Most other cell types are going to develop from parenchyma cells, so they're the most unspecialized cells in the plant. As a new cell is formed in a plant, it's going to be a parenchyma, and then it's going to specialize and change to become other types of cells. Okay, collenchyma cells, here they've got this thick primary wall, but they're still alive at functional maturity. The strings in a celery stalk are all collenchyma cells. You know how sometimes those are really, really hard to chew, and you kind of end up with this like fibrous mass? Kind of gross. But that's all collenchyma cells. Sclerenchyma cells are thick, rigid cells. They have a really, really rigid, hard cell wall, and they're actually what makes up the wood of a tree. Okay, the really hardest part. They can't elongate, they never grow because they're dead at functional maturity. Okay, they're used for support. A specific type of a sclerenchyma cell is a xylem vessel. So remember, xylem is part of the vascular tissue of the plant, and xylem is going to be transporting water and minerals. Okay, xylem vessels and xylem tracheids are going to be doing that movement of water and minerals. The fibers that make up a plant are also going to be made of sclerenchyma cells. And also things like nutshells and seed coats are all going to be made of sclerenchyma cells, okay? Most of the time, the sclerenchyma cells are things we either don't eat or we're not digesting of a plant. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about vascular tissue and xylem. So this is what xylem looks like under a microscope, the green part here. Okay, and remember, these cells are dead at functional maturity because all they have to do is act as a straw so that water can move up them. Remember, the movement of water through a plant requires no energy. As we talked about back when we looked at the properties of water, water moves up through a plant because of cohesion and adhesion. As water evaporates out of the plant at the top, more water is pulled in to take its place. So since it doesn't require any energy, there's no point in the xylem cells being alive. There's no point in wasting energy in the plant keeping those cells functioning, because all they do is act as straws. Okay? They move water and minerals up, and they are dead at functional maturity. Okay? And now this is structure and function. The structure of the xylem cells. They are a tube, they are dead, they are open all on the inside. There's nothing else on the inside. That structure allows them to best do their function. And we're going to constantly be looking throughout the year at how does structure allow for function and how does function help determine structure. It's a very important thing. Okay, phloem cells are the other type of vascular tissue, and their purpose is to carry sugar and nutrients throughout the plant, usually from the leaves going down and being stored in the roots, but then also from the roots in the spring back up to the top of the plant so that new leaves can grow. These cells are open in the middle, and at the end they have these sieve plates. So it's this plate that's got all these holes in it, and that's going to allow the phloem cells to really build up a pressure. We'll talk about later why that pressure is so important. Okay? So phloem cells are living cells. They have a cell membrane, they have cytoplasm to help them to control diffusion, what moves in and out of them, but they've lost their nucleus, their ribosomes, and their vacuole because all of those things take up space, and the phloem doesn't need them. What they need is space in the middle to move a lot of stuff through. So again, structure, function. It's more room for the liquid food to move through the cell. Okay? Sieve tubes had that sieve plate at the end, and then the companion cells are next to the phloem cells, and these are nucleated cells, and they're going to help the phloem do their job in their transport. And we'll look at that more when we talk about transport. Okay, so how are you going to remember which one is which, xylem versus phloem? I have a very goofy thing that I always do that helps me remember, and hopefully it will help you remember which one is which. So xylem. Xylem moves materials from the ground all the way up to the top of the plant. Okay, so whenever I think of xylem, I think of my hands going way up in the air and I say xylem, like stuff is going way high. Dorky, but it works for me. Then phloem is sugar. So sugar moves very slowly. And then phloem is usually moving from the leaves down. So whenever I think of phloem, I say phloem. And it's moving slowly because it's that sugary water. Think about syrup spreading on a plate slowly. So xylem going up and phloem going down. Hopefully that will help you remember. All right, so where and how are the different tissues organized within the different organs? Where are the different parts? All right, so here is a cutting of a stem of a dicot. A dicot is a specific group of plants. So we kind of divide plants into different terms, into different groups, and one of the ways that we divide them into groups is based on their structures. So there are dicots. Your book sometimes refers to them as eudicots, two words that mean the same thing. And then there are also monocots. So dicots are trees and shrubs. Monocots are usually grasses and lilies. So you can look and you can see where the different tissues exist. So you've got your dermal tissue on the outside, okay? On both of these, the dermal tissue goes on the outside because derm is like the skin, all right? The ground tissue is all the stuff in the middle, and then the vascular tissue is going to be organized a little bit different. In a dicot, you've got a ring of vascular tissue that moves all the way around the outside of the stem, and the phloem is on the outside of the xylem. So it goes dermal tissue, phloem, xylem, ground. Okay, that's in a dicot. In a monocot, you've got these little clusters. So the monocot, I always think of it like a chocolate chip cookie. All the chips are these clusters of vascular tissue, and it's a bundle with xylem and phloem both in. So throughout the whole stem, there are all these little vascular bundles. And then everything else in the middle there is all ground. Okay? What about in the roots? In the roots, again, you've got the derm on the outside, and then in the very middle of the root of a dicot, you've got this cross, or this X, vascular tissue, okay? And the very middle is the xylem, and the outer part that's kind of blue here is the phloem. So you've got blue phloem, kind of purpley xylem in the very, very middle, and that's in a dicot. In a monocot, you've got this tough layer here. This is an endodermis, an inner derm layer, and then you've got these circles, a circle of phloem on the outside and then xylem on the inside. And that's going to be a trend you're going to want to notice throughout plant anatomy, is that phloem is always closer to the surface of the plant than the xylem. The xylem's always in the as close to the center as it can get. Okay? All right, so there you go. Flaming carrot, kind of fun and silly. Plant anatomy. Hope it makes sense. See you guys later.